Called Professor David Betz that you might have seen being people getting quite excited about because he's saying that civil war is coming to the West. What I've noticed, what I think is a lot of people gushing over this man, Professor David Betz. I think for a number of reasons. The first reason, I think people, if you're an out of power, out of fashion sort of opposition group, which is what we are, then quoting the establishment back at itself can be kind of fun. It also, I think what people want to do is to be able to give confidence to the passive majority of our population in order to get them to be a bit more active, to say, look, someone from the establishment agrees with us. You can voice your opinions about multiculturalism as well. Don't be so passive. I think that's part of the motivation. And also, another reason is that when you are crying in the wilderness, as a lot of us have been doing for a long time, then and trying to stir up a passive public, then clutching at respectability, that can feel like a relief. You don't need that. I think that's kind of slavish. Work things out for yourself. If you're right, you are right, and stick it to them. It doesn't matter if people don't agree. It doesn't matter if they don't accept it yet. They will come to. But you can work it out for yourself. I think probably as good as any academic. I think it's a little bit slavish, the admiration and gratitude that's being paid to David Betts simply for talking to people and doing which is talking about what he is paid to do. It seems a bit over the top. And I see something similar with a little bit of excitement about Dominic Cummings coming out and saying that there are a lot of people in positions of authority who can foresee some kind of civil, social breakdown, and but that they're not talking about it. Now, David Betts has been getting softball interviews pretty much everywhere. People hanging on his words and agreeing with him and saying how nice it is to hear his insights. The one exception to that was a recent interview that David Clues from UNN did with him. I don't really agree with David Clues' criticisms, but I was glad to see him stick it to Professor Betts and to put Professor Betts under a little bit of pressure. And I think Professor Betts, he needs to be more of that, because I think his analysis is inadequate. It's not just that I disagree with it. I don't think it's up to scratch. I think it's a bit irresponsible. Now, full disclosure, I'll get it out of the way first. I emailed Professor Betts in March saying, will you talk to me? And he emailed me back on a Friday evening saying, quotes, I'd like to hold off on the podcast. I'm not really a public figure, so these last few podcasts have been unusual for me. So what he's saying there is he's not really comfortable being a public figure. And all these podcasts are he's not really used to them. It's unusual. He doesn't want to do another one. He'd rather not do another one. It's nothing to do with me. I think that's what he was saying. I emailed him back saying, no, I really think you should, because if you have this knowledge, there are these problems coming, you should try and give people a guide. You are a public, and perhaps a public paid academic. You should share your knowledge with people. If you think you've got it, you should talk publicly. And I didn't get a reply to that. And then 36 hours later, on the Sunday morning, an interview that he did with New Culture Forum got published, and that got 450,000 views within a day. So I don't believe that he said he didn't want to be interviewed by me because he is not really a public figure and that these podcasts are unusual. I think he didn't want to associate with a bad guy like me, but he didn't want to say so. I think that's a shame, because I think whatever my reputation, he would have had quite a good reasoned discussion, not really a debate, but further analysis with me pointing out, what about this, what about that? So forgive me if I don't pay him all the respect he is due. Now, I'm not saying this simply because I want to be mean to him. I want to get back to him. I think this is relevant. It's relevant because it illustrates what I think of as his timidity. And I think that timidity undermines a big part of what he's saying is likely to happen. I think he's not a particularly brave academic. I noticed in one of his podcasts, I find it's quite significant he said, I can't remember if it was the one with Louise Perry or with New Culture Forum, where he said he'd been in the army, I think the Canadian army, and he said he found he was a better analyst than a soldier. I suspect he might not be the most ferocious of warriors, put it that way. So now I think, just to sum it up in advance, I think David Betz is wrong about civil war. I don't think we're going to get civil war. I think we're going to get civil breakdown followed by hard ethnic division. Now I think his timidity is the main thing that makes him wrong. Firstly, it means he wants to stay within the tram lines of the existing, set up by the existing bank of historical research and knowledge based on historical examples, maybe from centuries ago. And the second thing is, I don't think he wants to face up to the blunt reality of race, ethnicity, and the invasion that we've been subjected to. I think maybe that's for academic reasons. He's talking about values. He's talking about shared civil values is his frame, and asymmetric multiculturalism being a bad thing. So I think that is timidity, a little bit of fear in there. I wouldn't go so far. It would be unkind to call him a flat out coward. I wouldn't do that. But I think he needs to be a bit braver, a bit blunter about facing up to unpleasant reality. Now, what I want to look at is the two articles that I'm basing this on, the two articles he wrote. So give me a second. So if I go here, now this is the first one, Civil War Comes to the West. This was in summer 2023, where he outlines, he basically says, I've been studying how civil wars arise most of my career, and I've started finding that the conditions prevail in Western countries. So we can expect civil war as a possibility in Western countries, in some Western country, and it may spread from one Western country to another. And the second one was this one. Hold on, bear with me. That one is Civil War Comes to the West Part 2, and that was spring 2025. Now, the first thing I want to point out is his use of English, which I think is, as so often, a telltale sign. And I think he is using language in a roundabout way in order to avoid being direct and explicit. I think he fears being explicit. And as I was going through this last night and working through it, I kept rubbing my forehead thinking, oh God, I have to keep reading and rereading every sentence. And here's one that I chose at random. I found myself reading this one and thinking, what is this? So the configuration of demographic geography and the factional polarization that is its political consequence is a measurable fact. Okay, well, yep, if you say so. The precariousness of contemporary urbanity is a thing which geographers have worried over for at least half a century. Well, I don't know anyone else who has been. In short, the situation which I've described above is unpleasant, but it is not controversial as far as our grasp of current reality and theoretical understanding of how societies function is concerned. That is not the worst English that I've ever heard, but it is that's almost poor enough that it could have appeared in, I think that could not quite have appeared in George Orwell's essay, Politics in the English Language. So I think that is a giveaway, that use of English. Now, what I want to go through briefly is to summarize what he's saying is going to happen and his remedies, because I think that timidity creates errors that are visible. Now, the first thing he talks about is the destruction of legitimacy. And by that he means trust in institutions, trust in politicians, what he calls the elite disconnect, which is the examples are that their response to the Brexit vote, their undermining of the social contract, and their inability to respond to the grooming gang, that means the rape gang, scandals, or to respond to illegal immigration. Now, I don't think I agree with that. I don't think anyone's going to disagree. But this is quite vague. It's vague, I think cloudy language. And you can construe it whichever way you want. For instance, do you go with what people say, which is when they're polled, they say, I don't trust politicians, and that you see the graph, the trust is going down and down? Or do you go with what people do, where people are very, very reliant upon state institutions? You look at the NHS, it's probably, people, we are about as attached to it as any institution in our history, I would say. It's probably as popular as any monarchy has ever been that I can think of, but although I wasn't around in the medieval times. And legitimacy can be looked at in a number of ways. When something goes wrong, you turn to the police. You don't turn to the local gang lord. And well, people don't take out private pensions very much. We rely on the state pension. People don't save because people think, well, the state will take care of me if I fall on hard times. So you could, I don't have to point out that he's wrong to point out that he's being very vague, and it's impossible to nail down what he's saying. It's possible for him to measure and prove the point he's making. I think it's arm wavy. That's why I spend time going into the nerdy economic numbers. It's boring, it's hard, it's difficult, but it's those numbers are nailed down. And the economic rule is that things that can't go on forever don't, and that a court will not go into a pint pot. You can't fudge those figures in the way you can terms like legitimacy and elite disconnect. And he doesn't go into those economic numbers. Now, what his remedy there is what I would call a pull your socks up remedy. He calls on politicians to restore legitimacy, to rebuild trust via competence. How do they do that? Resigning in favour of someone more competent, going on training courses, just writing out 100 times, I will be more competent. How do you do that? He calls for more transparency, but although I don't know what those measures would be. Better enforcement against illegal immigration and crime. Well, governments are always saying they're going to do that. I don't, they're failing, and I don't think they have the money to do it. I mean, they're having to let people out. I think, is it 40% of the sentence now, or they might go down to 35%? I can't remember, because they don't have the money to build jails. And there should be more respect for democratic outcomes. And he means Brexit. Well, Brexit has gone through. I don't think those things are going to cause the civil breakdown that I refer to. I think there are way, massively bigger causes, namely the breakdown of the welfare state. But now, the second thing that he talks about is asymmetric multiculturalism. That's another telltale sign. That suggests to me that it's not multiculturalism, it's the asymmetry of the multiculturalism. So presumably, if it was symmetric multiculturalism, it would be okay. What he talks about is there is minority ethnic pride, but not ethnic pride for the white majority. That is frowned upon, that is discouraged. And that in turn encourages what he calls nativist sentiment, which I think he disapproves of, and which could justify revolt. This sounds to me as though he's trying to be colourblind, race blind, and trying to talk about even-handed British values for everyone. And there's no way that's going to work. Everyone goes on about that. It's having no effect. It never will. And he should know that. He should be able to see that if he knows anything about the immigrant populations. And the remedy he's calling for is that we should allow people to express cultural pride in order to weaken narratives of injustice that could potentially fuel extremism. Again, are we? I mean, I can wave my St George's flag if I want. Is the government really preventing that? Maybe it is. We certainly get frowned on if we express pride in Englishness. Maybe he's talking about that. I think this is all again rather vague, cloudy, and what I call arm wavy. Now what he also says is that multiculturalism has been terminally fractured by ethnic identity politics. So I think what he's saying is what I draw from what he's saying is multiculturalism is okay as long as it's symmetrical and as long as it isn't fractured by ethnic identity politics. So it's the identity politics that is a bad thing. Again, so I would peg him along on the Douglas Murray, Jordan Peterson grounds of identity politics, bad, British values, fairness, even-handedness, good. And that's just, it's just completely unrealistic. It willfully ignores the reality of race and ethnocentrism. And that kind of language that he uses leads me to to understand why he didn't want to talk to me, or why I think he didn't want to talk to me. Now, the third thing he mentions is economic stagnation. So economic and social decline. Yes, I think we all agree with that. But he only mentions it kind of in passing, in a very broad brush way. He doesn't get explicit, he doesn't get specific, he doesn't talk about numbers and graphs and projections, what this is going to mean and why there is no remedy. He talks about things like high taxation and then housing shortages. Well, if taxation is too high, how are you going to get government to spend money on social housing? He talks about strained public services. Again, you either have strained public services, or you have higher taxation, or you have higher debt, which will lead to higher taxation and more economic stagnation. And he also talks about the downgrading of the majority, well, really white population's status, their homes, their careers, and their family life. So I don't agree with them. I don't think the problem is the problem of I don't think the problem is that those economic issues create an English versus invader divide. I think the issue is that those economic problems can and will collapse the welfare state, and that our reaction to that will be very angry, really uncontrollable, that we will then just reject any kind of obedience or allegiance to the state. We will say the state has completely broken its side of this thing that we think of as the social contract, this thing we talk about. So people feel legitimate in just rejecting the state if that happens. I think that's the main significance of those economic problems. Now, the remedy he calls for there is to reverse the downgrading of majority prospects, i.e. White British prospects, like home ownership and careers. But he doesn't say how that's going to happen. How does that happen if tax rates are already too high? I think this is magic wand thinking. And I think what it says is there's a lack of courage about analysing the problems as they are. He does repeatedly say, this is what I would propose, I don't think it's going to happen. Well, no, wrong answer. That is not good enough. Don't say, I recommend this, but it won't happen, so there's nothing to do about it. Just say, I would recommend this, it won't happen, governments won't do it. That means we're stuck with a really ugly situation. And in that situation, you have to do this or that. You have to get out of Dodge. You have to train to be able to risk the depredations of invaders. He has to talk turkey. I don't think it's good enough to say, well, I'd like this to happen, I'd like that to happen, I'd like there to be lower taxes but more money spent on social housing. I don't think that is good enough. I don't think he looks into the interconnectedness of all these things. I think his economic understanding is poor. And for someone who's been paid his whole career to look at this, I would have thought you'd have a much finer, a much closer understanding of how the economic reality interacts with the social reality, the social breakdown above it in civil war situations. Now, the fourth thing he talks about is the urban-rural divide. I think this is particularly weak because I think he is using this as code for white, British or English versus immigrants. But he doesn't want to, I think he doesn't want to talk about that. I think he is frightened to talk about racial division. And so he's falling back on what I think is a historic formula. That urban-rural divide reminds me of what was talked about before the English Civil War, which I'm guessing he must know about, which was the court versus country divide. That's how the pre-Civil War division was expressed. So the court was decadent, elegant, spendthrift, and scheming, and the countryside was neighbourly, direct, straight, and frugal, and patriotic and Protestant. And I suspect what he's doing there again is staying within the established rails the existing bank of historic knowledge. I think he's doing that out of timidity. And so I think he then, and that it's easier to say that than it is to say we're going to face a white versus immigrant divide and conflict. And also, I think he's just wrong. I don't think there is an urban-rural divide. I'm not aware of people in the city who hate me because I live in the countryside. Um, I've, I certainly, I live way out the back of nowhere. None of my neighbours have any resentment towards people in the town. I remember when I was a child, some people would jokingly refer to townies, and I thought it was a stupid phrase then. I haven't heard that for decades. If I were to say to people, have you thought about attacking the infrastructure that serves the towns, like a gas pumping station or an electricity substation? I think they'd look at me like I was mad. I don't detect any urban-rural divide. I think, I think it's about a race divide, and that racial divide actually cuts through the cities. It's not towns uh, 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 um, full of immigrants and no one else, countryside full of white people and no one else. It basically, in towns, even towns like Leicester, what you get is quite a peppered patchwork of many different varieties of invaders, often very hostile to one another, separated or next to really quite substantial majority white areas. So I think that racial divide will be along racial lines. It won't be between towns and country. It'll be within the towns. The divide line will go down through towns like Leicester, perhaps Birmingham or Manchester as well. And he then talks about this as being significant because what he fears is rural factions, people like me, I guess, targeting vulnerable infrastructure services that serve the cities. So power grids and transit, I don't know, blowing up motorway bridges, that kind of things, in order to destabilize cities. It just doesn't occur to me to do that. I have no reason to do that. I don't want to do that. I would stop someone doing that. I don't know anyone. No one has ever mentioned that to me. That's just off the wall. I think again, that is because it's not just code. It's simply wrong. He's saying something that is wrong, and that I just don't know where he gets it from. I'd have thought that the briefest analysis would show that there isn't really that kind of divide, and but he's saying what I think he must know. I think he must know it's wrong, and I think he's saying it in order to avoid talking about race. Now, his solutions there are to reduce the disparities between urban and rural areas. Well, my understanding is that people who live in towns envy people like me who live way out the back of nowhere because we're away from all the enrichment. But what he seems to be saying is that rural white areas feel disadvantaged, and so that government should reduce the disparities by lifting up those of us in the countryside. Great, I hope the government gives me a big wad of money. I don't think that's going to happen. He talks about investing in rural economies. I don't know, what, farm subsidies, maybe a village hall, but subsidising a village hall, and then decentralising services. I guess that means moving Whitehall out into the Lake District or Northumberland or out into Cornwall. I don't think government has the money to do that. It doesn't want to create the disruption. Again, I think this is magic wand thinking. I don't think he's serious about that point. I'm quite hard on that point. I think he's just wrong, and I think he should know it. He is paid to understand that. I am not. I have a day job. So the fifth item is identity politics. And his view seems to be identity politics bad, shared civic values good. Again, this is pure Jordan Peterson. We won't have identity politics. It's the sort of civic nationalist, the weaker end, the diluted end of civic nationalist politics. Now, he's talking about societal fractures that are leading to competing tribes. And I think the examples he gives are Muslim Hindu violence, but also the word he uses is nativism, which I take to be weight, or English nationalism, which tends to undermine shared civic values, which I think he likes. Now, I think that, again, that is, that seems like he's got the blinkers on. He's deliberately keeping the blinkers on. Is it willful blindness? I mean, he has spent his career, a paid career, advising governments. I think he should be able to take his blinkers off and see the reality of racial and ethnic conflict within our countries. And I think the reason he's failing to do so is out of timidity and conformism. Perhaps he might get ostracized within his sort of academic community. He might not be asked to advise politicians anymore, which must feel very nice. And I think he wants to seem race blind and colour blind. And the implication of what he's saying is, as long as we show no preference to immigrants, as long as everyone's treated the same and everyone's encouraged to integrate, then it should work. Multiculturalism should work out okay. And I'm fairly saying that that's fine. It is not. And that's what's being played out in front of our eyes now. So I'm not trying to be mean to him. I'm trying to be mean to his analysis, because I think it's wrong, and because he's getting a lot of very favourable publicity, which I don't think is due to him. And because he's saying civil war is coming, I don't think him saying civil war is likely to come means it's going to happen. The weatherman doesn't cause the rain. The issue I have is there are a lot of people who actually would like civil war. There are a lot of people who won't get up and do anything, a lot of very lazy, passive people who, when you scratch the surface, will say, I'm going to wait for this to fall apart. I'm going to wait for it to boil over, and then we'll sort it out our own way. Then we'll deal with it through our own methods. And what they mean is violence, kind of civil conflict. And if he's going to talk about civil war, I think he should make sure he gets it right. I think he should take a bit more effort to get it right, and be willing to go outside the established tram lines of historical knowledge, of research knowledge that are based on examples that don't apply today, have very little application, it seems to me. They're all fascinating, all those examples. I don't think that they apply today. I think that those examples are the English Civil War of the 1640s, American Civil War of the 1860s, Russian Civil War, the sort of about 1920, Spanish Civil War, 1930s, and Chinese Civil War of the 1940s, and parts of the sort of Civil War aspects of the French Revolution. But I don't think those apply today for the reasons that I've given. Okay, bear with me a second. And to the extent that he puts forward remedies, I find them arm wavy. And he himself, he has a tendency to say, this is what I think should happen. I don't think there's any realistic prospect of it happening. I don't think governments are going to do this. And so it won't happen. So no, you are a paid academic. If you can see that there might be this solution, it's not going to happen. You should say, I'd say that this should happen. It's unlikely to happen. Therefore, you have to do this. So governments should reduce the urban-rural divide. They're not going to do it. They can't afford it. Therefore, if you're living in a town, get out of Dodge, or arm yourselves, or train, or do something so you can resist that civil conflict, or so you can be safe. Instead of saying, this is what we should do, but it's not likely to happen. I think that is irresponsible to do that to people. Now, I think there are three weaknesses in his analysis. And firstly, I think he's spent his career, quite a long career, reading theory and history. And it's very easy when you do that to seem a lot more intelligent than you are. Douglas Murray, I think he's particularly good at that, talking about history and literature when he's telling someone off. And I like to talk about history, and it can make you seem like a smart guy. Don't be snowed by that. Don't be washed over by that. Those historical examples, they're just like the backdrop to the photo shoot. They're just the background. They're not the reality that's happening today. Don't be taken in by someone who talks too much of that, usually because they're a good talker, they're glib. And the problem is that if someone spends their entire career, their life, looking at and focusing on that backdrop. Say, imagine David Betz as a photographer, and all his life he's just looking at that same green screen backdrop, that same picture board backdrop to the photograph. He could come to see that that backdrop is the reality, which which it isn't. The person in front of him that he's looking at, that he's photographing, that is the reality. And I wonder, I think that might be the case with David Betz, particularly because I think he fears straying outside of the confines, the tram lines of his academic discipline. You should not be put off by that. I think that in difficult, unpredictable circumstances, it tends to be the non-professionals, the amateurs, who get it right a lot of the time, not the professionals. I'm going to talk a bit of history here with the collapse of the Soviet Union, which I think is the closest simile, the closest example to what we're going to go through. The people who predicted it best were complete amateurs. Ronald Reagan, a B-movie actor, Bernard Levin, a Telegraph journalist, a fellow called Andrei Amalrik in the Soviet Union. He just kept getting expelled from school, and then he got expelled from university. He was just a nail that you couldn't hammer down, a dissident. And he predicted the fall of the Soviet Union, not the precise circumstances of it, but he predicted that it would happen. Malcolm Muggeridge, this dilettante, kind of luxuriating journalist who he got it right in that he didn't foresee the date, but he foresaw the unsustainability of the Soviet Union. And this was all the while you had American academics producing textbooks saying that the Soviets were going to become, their rate of growth was faster than American growth, and they were going to overtake America. Every year their books would say that. It's really comical. And what I would encourage you to do, you can work things out for yourself. What you need, and I think you can do it better than an academic, you don't have to have that broad sweep of historical knowledge. That can occasionally be useful, but don't be overborne by it. Don't feel inadequate because of it. As long as you've got a reasonably non-egoistic, clear-sighted view of reality, that clear-eyed view of reality with your ego out of it. Secondly, a sort of a pessimistic streak, because reality tends to be disappointing or awkward. It's not quite right. Because we're so selfish, reality always disappoints us. And so if you have a pessimistic view, you're likely to be able to predict what's going to happen accurately. And finally, thirdly, I'd say the ability to stack things up coldly, just to do raw maths in a cold way. 2 + 2 = 4. I'm sorry if that's disappointing to you, but I don't care. It doesn't stop it equaling 4. And if you can do that, you will tend to be able just to piece together the reality. Well, what's going to happen next? What if that happens? Will that happen or that? Why this and not that? And then you can, I think you can piece it together for yourselves. And this I think is Professor Betz's problem. I think his timidity leads him to want to stay within the established examples, the historical knowledge and the historical research that has been conducted by his colleagues, by the rest of his profession. And those examples, all those civil wars that I quoted previously, they are all about a breakdown of state authority against a reasonably united opposition or united coalition. Now, David Betz defines civil war as a war that is occurring between 2 or more belligerents, but usually the main examples, will tend to be the state versus a fairly unified opposition. All those different opponents come together, they then oppose the state. They might break down later and have their conflict between them, but at the stage of when the civil war breaks out, classically you have 2 sides facing each other. So legitimacy breaks down, opposition grows, the state digs its heels in, there's no prospect of negotiation, conflict starts between the 2 sides. I do not think that's what we're facing here for a moment. And that's because of what I think of as 2 really historically unprecedented factors, huge, I would say massive factors that we have never experienced since we crawled out of a puddle. And those two are welfare and immigration. Firstly, welfare. The state spends half of all wealth that gets produced across the Western world. And most of that is done in order to either protect us or to solve our problems, to pay us, to give us free stuff, welfare goods. The welfare snob. And that has become ingrained in us. That idea, I think, for at least 3 generations, I think we have taken on board voluntarily, ingrained into ourselves, this idea that the state can, should, and will take care of us. And any serious problems, any serious adult problems that we might have, how to educate our children, what to do with our elderly, what to do if we get sick, what to do if we get unemployed, what to do if there's a crime against us, all kinds of things. And that we think of that as being part of the natural order of things that distills out of the air like rain. And the question then is, what happens if that welfare state runs out? How are we going to react? I think we see the welfare state the way we see oxygen. So how would you react if someone tried to cut off your oxygen supply by throttling you? You get very angry, and I think that's how a lot of us are going to react. But this doesn't bode civil war; it bodes civil breakdown. Welfare state breaks down, we get angry, we reject the state's authority, and then the breakdown of the civil order of things. So that's the first one, the massive level of welfare spending, which I can't think of any previous example in history, not even in the Soviet Union, which people didn't take seriously. It said it had a kind of welfare state, but Soviet citizens didn't really believe that the Soviet state was going to take care of you. It was going to take care of you in other ways. Now, the second example is what I would call extreme immigration. I think it's extreme for this reason. Grok tells me that between 1066 and 1997, the total amount of immigration to Britain was between 2 and 4 million people. Grok also says that since 1997, total immigration to Britain has been 9.1 million people. So what that means is basically since 97, we've had 3 times the amount of immigration that we've had between 1066 and 1997. So massive amount of immigration. But it's not just the numbers. Previously, the numbers that would have come between 1066 and 1997 would have been people from neighbouring states, so Germany, Denmark, Ireland, France, and in the 1990s from parts of Western Europe, people who were ethnically very, very similar to us, had very similar values and political attitudes. What characterises the immigration since then is the extreme variety of it and how different it is and how violent and nasty it is. People coming from very violent social traditions, very, very violent ethnic makeup, and very, very hostile and resentful. People who see their manhood as being invested in their ability to get angry and violent. I refer specifically to Muslim populations, but also to a lot of African populations. Give me your own opinion about their machete wars. Now, the extreme variety of so many different ethnicities from so far afield, all gathering together and then all encouraged to form their own little mini enclaves within parts of towns, sometimes just consisting of a few streets. That is just completely unprecedented throughout history. Normally it has been, what that has created is a sort of a hodgepodge of fine-grained or a scattered medley of all those different varieties. And I went through this in a video that I did previously. If I just show you this, I'll just show you what the video is here. That video, Why We Will Win Conditions in Foreigner Enclaves. Now, that explains why those foreigner enclaves are likely to be so conflict-ridden because you have so many, and they're sort of so interconnected, interlocking, and so hostile to each other. And a lot of them are so violent that they're just going to attack each other if the state falls over. So it, migration and invasion doesn't usually follow that pattern. And we have the deliberate importation of every variety, the more varied, the better. And I think that again characterizes civil breakdown and ethnic division, where we, the white English population, say we just don't want anything to do with any of this hodgepodge of invasive populations. And what that points towards is civil breakdown, not civil war, followed by multifaceted separation along racial and ethnic racial and ethnic lines. Now, I don't think that separation, the reason I don't think it will resemble civil war is because whilst we don't want anything to do with a lot of those immigrant populations, they don't want anything to do with each other. They are as hostile to each other as they are to us. Pakistanis and Bengalis, Africans and West Indians don't seem to get on very well, and Africans and Arabs seem to really get on very badly indeed. So I can see multifaceted, multiracial conflict between the immigrant populations, meaning that they pose very little threat to us. I think they'll be little threat to us for other reasons. Firstly, because their enclaves will be just very difficult places to break out of. People usually put in my comments, those Muslims, they'll come rampaging out into the countryside, raping and looting. I don't think they'll be able to break out because they'll be in congested areas where they can't make weapons, they can't test them, they can't train properly, they can't really work out strategy and tactics. They might be able to do mass charges, but they won't be able to get anywhere. I think their enclaves will be very easy to contain. I would say that you actually don't, well, particularly if we have the army on our side, but I don't think you need to have the army on side to do it. I'd have thought 50 or 100 of me, given a sniper rifle with a scope, could probably contain the whole ethnic enclave within Leicester. I think it could be as easy to do as that. And they're not, I don't think they are a military threat. If you Google why Muslims lose wars, you come up, there's quite a lot of research into that. Again, they are, diversity is our greatest strength, but they are useless at military strategy for a bunch of reasons. Partly tribalism, which means they don't coordinate, they don't share intelligence, so the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. They're extremely autocratic, so there's no autonomy for lower level commanders, lower level officers, certainly not for an NCO or a junior officer. And they have very bad fatalistic training. You probably will have seen clips from Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan where they just don't bother aiming a rifle. And you think, don't they know what a rifle scope is? They just sort of hold it over their head or hold it over their shoulder and fire behind them. We consider that to be bad military training. Muslims, a devout Muslim considers that to be good military strategy because it's not, what makes your bullet hit the target is not aiming it well, it is Allah's will. So if Allah wants the bullet to hit your enemy, he will make it hit the enemy. And by not aiming your rifle properly, you show that you have strong faith in Allah. If you show that, Allah is more likely to favor you, and those are more likely to guide your bullets. It is as fatalistic as that. So I think those enclaves will be easy to contain, especially if we have the army on our side, which I think we can accomplish. We can keep the army on our side. Now, the closest I think it will resemble to civil war is siege warfare. I don't even think we can dignify it with that name. Siege warfare is where you conduct a long military squeeze on an area, sort of a little bit like Israel is doing in Gaza now. I don't think we'll have to go that far, Actually, Israel is doing worse than that in Gaza. It's bombarding it, but that's another story. But I don't think we'll need to go that far. I think it will simply be invader populations within our towns declaring independence and finding that within these areas that they've grabbing territory within towns and then walling them up and saying, you're not coming in here, this is our territory. Then they'll find their territory is very violent, poverty-stricken and disease-ridden. And those conditions will force them to go and to be amenable to a one-way ticket home. That is not civil war. I don't think that's even siege warfare. That is simply allowing invader populations to stew in their own juice. Okay, now the second issue, the second problem that I think David Betz' analysis faces is I think it is a fear about facing up bluntly, directly to the realities of race and ethnicity. That phrase, asymmetric multiculturalism, the solution is not symmetric multiculturalism. That urban-rural divide, again, don't talk to me in code. Spell it out bluntly, directly, simple language. You can do it. I think he's paid to do that. I think it's irresponsible not to. And if that, his advice to get out of cities, I suspect what he appears to be saying, what I'm for he's saying is, get out of cities because there's going to be a conflict between the multicultural, diverse cities and the white English countryside. But I think what he's really saying is get away from foreigners, which doesn't mean you have to get out of the towns and cities, because there are large areas of quite a lot of towns and cities that are still not that diverse. They're still majority white. And I should say he has referred to ethnic division by saying that identity groups, he doesn't like the politics of identity. I think the politics of identity are a necessary and inevitable aspect of civil society. You can't get away from it. A bit like sex within marriage that pre-Victorians just weren't able to talk about. I think he has difficulty talking about racial ethnic identity within civil society. And he talks about identity groups breaking along ethnic lines. I think he doesn't like that. He's saying that. I think he's saying that's a bad thing. I get the impression, I can't read his mind, but I get the impression he's saying it in order to say that he said it, to kind of tick a box. And he needs to go a lot further, and he doesn't. Now, the third issue I have with him is I think in general, as I've said, I think his analysis is cloudy, it's arm-wavy. Talking about legitimacy or grievances, these things are not really that measurable. You can look at them from all different directions. It's very difficult to nail them down. And economic stagnation, that's easy to talk about, but it doesn't deal with the specific, explicit, nailed down numbers that underlie it. So there's nothing, he doesn't project from those numbers. He doesn't take something, he doesn't use them as pegs that you can then project from. And I think that's why I focus on the economic numbers. It's nerdy, but you can't move it, because in the field of economics, what can't go on doesn't. And I don't think he really has anything to say, very much to say about remedies. He mentions, he does talk about remedies, but then says they're unlikely to happen. So I think that it's very vague. I think he should do better than that. I think I can do better than that, and no one pays me anything to do what I've done. So my advice is don't run away with what he said. I don't think he is giving us a very good steer. It's not going to be about civil war. I think it will be about civil breakdown. I think we will get economic decline. That will lead to economic crisis. That will lead to the breakdown of the economic state. I don't think the government will announce it. They won't warn us. It will simply one day just not be there. The town hall will be closed. Your housing benefit check won't arrive, or say some child benefit check doesn't arrive. You go to your local MP, you go to get your local councillor, and you find they're nowhere to be found. Your MP has hopped on the last jet out. And then I think the state falls over. If the welfare state falls over, then I think you get hard ethnic, racial separation then I think you get war, poverty and disease within the invader enclaves, and then I think they become amenable to a ticket back to their homeland. What matters is what we do if that breakdown comes. I don't see anything from David Betz. I think he's quite weak on what we need to do about it when it happens. He's saying it's going to happen, was likely to happen. I think he's weak about what we should do about it. I'd like to do another video next about what we can do. People have asked me to do that. I'd like to do that next. I think the main thing that we can do is to, once the state goes down, to make law for ourselves, law that we can live by so that we can perpetuate order amongst ourselves, suppress crime, make it safe for us to live around each other, and make it easy for us to continue to trade and remain prosperous. If we can do that, we will find it easy to pay the army, keep the army on side. We'll find it easy to contain the invader enclaves until they ship themselves home. And that is what I think we need to do. I'll deal with that in the next video. In the meantime, don't be too snowed under by the expertise of David Betz. I don't think he is a particularly good guide. Thank you.